5 years ago, my neighbor Charles reported his 14-year-old son missing. The news spread quickly, and my wife and I felt a deep sympathy for them, offering help whenever we could. As time passed with no word, we assumed they had come to terms with their loss, though we never had the courage to ask about it. A couple of years later, Charles approached me while I was taking out the trash, asking to borrow a shovel. I didn't think twice and lent him my best one. Later, from my upstairs window, I noticed him digging a large hole in his backyard. His behavior was odd. He seemed nervous and kept looking around as if he was being watched. That night, I heard the sound of a shovel hitting dirt outside. Curiosity got the better of me, and I sneaked into his backyard. In the moonlight, I saw a black garbage bag protruding from the dirt at the bottom of the hole. My heart raced as I debated whether to investigate further. Ultimately, I decided to retreat, fearing what I might find. The next day, the hole was filled in, and Charles was acting even more strangely, avoiding me completely. A few days later, I caught him staring into my window. I was terrified, wondering if I had stumbled upon something sinister, perhaps the remains of his son. I never told anyone, not even my wife, and I still don't know what to do. When I was 15, I lived next door to two boys, Eric and Todd, who were known for their troublemaking. One day while playing basketball, Todd invited me and my younger brother to shoot BB guns in the woods. We were excited but uneasy about their serious demeanor. When we arrived, Todd revealed that the guns were real. Panic set in as I realized the danger we were in. I quickly returned the guns to the bag, telling them we had to leave. Their reaction was hostile. They cursed at us as we walked away. That night, I was awakened by a cold breeze and the sensation of something pressing against my head. It was Todd, whispering threats about killing me and my family if I told anyone about the guns. For months, I lived in fear, often seeing them lurking outside my window. Just a week before we moved, Todd threw a rock at my window while aiming a gun at me. I was terrified and relieved when we finally left that house, knowing those boys were trouble and that we had escaped just in time. After college, I found myself living in a rough neighborhood. My neighbors were a strange pair, an unfriendly older woman and a younger woman with severe mental disabilities. Their behavior was unsettling, especially when the younger woman would have violent outbursts, often pointing and mumbling at me. One night, the noise escalated, and I decided to confront them. When I knocked on their door, the older woman answered with irritation, and the younger woman screamed at me. I felt defeated but relieved when they finally quieted down. Later that night, I woke up to a dark room and heard something moving downstairs. I was terrified to find the deranged woman from next door at the edge of my bed, screaming like a banshee. I bolted for the door, locking it behind me and calling the police as she pounded on it. When the officers arrived, the older woman pleaded for them to let her go, giving me a menacing glare. I chose not to press charges, but the look she gave me haunted me. After that night, I considered moving away, knowing that my neighbors were not just creepy, but potentially dangerous. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, Laura had always taken pride in her home and the friendly atmosphere of her community. But after the Johnsons moved in next door, things began to change. At first, Mr. Johnson was charming. He brought over freshly baked cookies and offered to help with yard work. But soon, his visits became more frequent and invasive. One night, Laura was woken by a soft tapping at her window. She peered through the curtains and saw Mr. Johnson standing in his yard, staring at her house. His expression was unsettling, and he held a lantern that cast eerie shadows across his face. The next day, she found a note slipped under her door. "Don't worry, Laura. I'm always watching out for you." Chills ran down her spine. She brushed it off as a harmless gesture until she discovered her garden had been weeded overnight. Perfectly neat, but she hadn't asked for help. As days passed, Laura's unease grew. Each morning, she found her property had been meticulously maintained, flowers arranged, trash taken out, and she began suspecting that Mr. Johnson had a hand in it. When she confronted him, he just smiled, his eyes glinting with an unsettling intensity. "A true neighbor looks out for those around him," he said too eagerly. One evening, as she prepared for bed, Laura heard a noise from the basement. Gathering her courage, she grabbed a flashlight and descended the stairs. To her horror, she found Mr. Johnson standing amidst her belongings. He held a collection of photos he had taken of her while she slept. "See? I told you I'm always watching out for you," he whispered, the shadows in the dim light contorting his face into a grotesque mask. In that moment, Laura realized Mr. Johnson's kindness was a twisted obsession. She backed away slowly, her heart racing. But as she turned to flee, he blocked the steps, his smile widening. Like I said, a true neighbor is always there for you, even when you don't want them to be. And the neighborhood, now dark and silent, stood witness to the true nature of their neighbor, forever entwined with the night.